The cold wind whipped across Hannah Blackwell's back as she knelt before the small wooden cross, her knuckles white from gripping the freshly turned earth as if she could somehow reach down through the soil and touch her son one last time. Wyoming Territory, 1878, was as unforgiving as it was beautiful, and it had taken the one thing she couldn't bear to lose. 6 days she had been coming here, watching as the little mound that housed her 5-year-old son's body settled under the relentless elements. 6 days since the fever had taken him, burning him from the inside out while she helplessly pressed cool cloths to his forehead and prayed to a god who seemed to have abandoned her homestead long ago. 6 days of existing without truly living, wearing the same faded gray dress now stained with tears and dirt, her auburn hair hanging in limp strands around her hollow face. Hannah pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as the late October chill seeped through to her bones. She didn't care. The cold was a welcome distraction from the emptiness that had taken residence inside her chest where her heart used to be. Behind her, the small log cabin she'd shared with little Samuel sat dark and quiet. She couldn't bear to go back inside, not yet. Not when every corner held echoes of his laughter, when his wooden toys still lay scattered by the hearth where he'd last played. "Sleep well, my sweet boy," she whispered, her voice cracking from disuse and grief. The small gravesite sat on a gentle slope overlooking the valley, where wildflowers would bloom come spring. Samuel had loved picking flowers for her. "Mama will be right here when you wake up." The sound of hoofbeats in the distance barely registered in Hannah's grief-clouded mind. Few travelers passed this way, and none had any business with a widow whose homestead was failing even before tragedy struck. She'd lost her husband, Daniel, 2 winters ago to pneumonia, leaving her to manage the small cattle ranch with only occasional help from passing cowboys looking for temporary work. The hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed. Hannah didn't acknowledge the intrusion into her private mourning. Let whoever it was pass by, she had nothing to offer, not even conversation. "Madam," the deep voice came from behind her, respectful and hesitant. Still, Hannah didn't move. "Madam, I don't mean to disturb you, but—" The voice trailed off, uncertain. Only then did Hannah slowly turn her head, her eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. Through the haze of her grief, she made out the silhouette of a tall man against the setting sun. A cowboy by the look of his worn hat and the way he carried himself. He was leading a horse by the reins, a sturdy paint with a white blaze down its face. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying," Hannah said flatly, turning back to the grave. The man cleared his throat. "I'm not selling anything, madam. Name's August Calloway. I was passing through, saw you sitting here day before yesterday, and again yesterday. Thought maybe." He stepped forward, and Hannah noticed for the first time that he was holding something in his free hand, a small bunch of late-blooming wildflowers, purple and gold against the brown landscape. "Thought maybe these might be wanted," he finished awkwardly, extending the humble bouquet toward her. Hannah stared at the flowers, then up at the man's face. August Calloway had the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life under the open sky, his skin tanned and lined around kind eyes the color of a summer sky. A scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into a neatly trimmed beard streaked with premature silver. He wasn't young, perhaps mid-30s, but he stood straight and strong, with none of the swagger that younger cowboys often affected. "Why?" Hannah asked, her voice barely audible above the prairie wind. August shifted his weight, looking down at the small grave. "Lost my own little sister when I was young. Nobody brought flowers. Always wished someone had." The simple honesty in his words broke through something in Hannah's chest. She reached up with trembling fingers and took the wildflowers, laying them gently on Samuel's grave. "His name was Samuel," she said, her voice stronger now. "He was 5. August removed his hat and held it against his chest. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss, madam." "Hannah," she corrected him, surprising herself. "Hannah Blackwell. Mrs. Blackwell," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Just Hannah now." My husband's been gone 2 years. August nodded again, replaced his hat, and stood quietly, giving her the space to say whatever she needed to say. Fever took him, Hannah continued, not sure why she was telling this stranger about her grief but unable to stop the words now that they'd started flowing. 3 days of burning up calling for me and then, quiet, too quiet. Her voice broke on the last word. No parent should have to bury their child, August said softly. It ain't right. Hannah looked at the flowers again, touching one delicate purple petal. Thank you for these. Samuel loved flowers. Used to bring me handfuls of weeds, thinking they were the most beautiful things in the world. A ghost of a smile touched her lips at the memory. August glanced at the darkening sky. It'll be night soon. You got someone staying with you, Hannah? The question jerked her back to reality. She'd been so lost in grief that practical matters had fallen away. The cabin was empty, the fire long gone out. There was no food prepared, no lamps lit. I know, it's just me now. August looked troubled. You shouldn't be alone, not just after. Well, is there someone in town I could fetch for you? Family, maybe? Hannah shook her head. My parents are back east. Daniel's family never approved of him marrying me. She looked toward the cabin, suddenly aware of how cold she was, how tired. I'll be fine, Mr. Calloway. I've managed on my own before. August, he corrected gently. And with all due respect, madam, you don't look fine. He hesitated, then added, I've got some stew meat and coffee in my saddlebag. Would it be imposing if I was to build up your fire and cook something? You look like you haven't eaten in days. Hannah couldn't remember when she'd last eaten, maybe a piece of bread the day Samuel died. She should refuse this stranger's help, send him on his way. It wasn't proper having an unknown man at her cabin, but the thought of returning to the empty house alone made her chest constrict painfully. That would be kind, she admitted finally, rising unsteadily to her feet. August quickly stepped forward to offer his arm when she swayed. Hannah was startled by the contact, the first human touch she'd felt since the neighbor women had gently pulled her away from Samuel's body to prepare him for burial. She nearly collapsed against him, her legs weak from days of kneeling beside the grave. Easy now, August murmured, supporting her with surprising gentleness for such a large man. Take your time. They walked slowly back to the cabin, August leading his horse with one hand while supporting Hannah with the other. The small homestead came into better view, a sturdy log cabin with a porch that needed mending, a barn that listed slightly to one side, a corral holding 2 thin-looking cows and an old mule. Everything spoke of neglect and hard times, even before grief had taken Hannah's attention. When they reached the porch, August helped Hannah to a rough-hewn chair before tying his horse to the rail. You sit here a spell. I'll get a fire going inside. Too exhausted to argue, Hannah watched as he entered her home with the quiet confidence of a man used to making himself useful. Within minutes, smoke began to curl from the chimney, and the warm glow of firelight illuminated the windows against the gathering dusk. August reappeared in the doorway. Fire's catching nicely. Let me tend to my horse, and then I'll see about that stew. Hannah nodded, drawing her shawl tighter. She should feel frightened, or at least wary of this stranger taking charge of her home. But all she felt was a distant gratitude that someone else was handling the necessities of living that seemed beyond her grasp at the moment. While August unsaddled his horse and led it to the corral, Hannah finally found the strength to enter her cabin. The warmth hit her immediately, along with the familiar smells of home wood smoke, the herbs hanging from the rafters, the lingering scent of lye soap. She stood in the center of the main room, eyes drawn inevitably to Samuel's small bed in the corner, his quilt still rumpled from his last restless night. When August returned, he found her standing there, staring at the bed. He moved quietly around her, not commenting on her tears as he set his saddlebags on the table and began removing supplies. A package wrapped in waxed paper, coffee beans, a few potatoes, and an onion. "Hope you don't mind me using your cookware," he said, keeping his voice conversational as he found a pot and filled it with water from the bucket by the door. No, Hannah whispered, finally pulling herself away from Samuel's bed to sink into a chair at the table. No, please, go ahead. August worked efficiently, slicing the meat and vegetables into the pot and hanging it over the fire. He ground the coffee beans and set water to boil in a smaller pot. His movements were practiced, those of a man accustomed to making do in temporary camps and unfamiliar kitchens. Been on the trail long? Hannah asked, reaching for normalcy through the fog of grief. August nodded. Coming up from Colorado, was working a cattle drive that ended in Denver, decided to head north before winter sets in. Looking for work, always. His mouth quirked in a half-smile. Drifting's what I do best, I'm afraid. Hannah watched him move around her kitchen, this tall stranger with gentle hands. Why did you stop? Really? August paused in his preparation, meeting her eyes directly. Truthfully, something told me I needed to. Saw you out there yesterday, sitting so still in the cold. Couldn't get it out of my mind when I made camp last night. Thought I'd just ride on today, but… He shrugged. Guess I know what it's like to grieve alone. His honesty disarmed her. Hannah found herself nodding, accepting his answer. Coffee's nearly ready, August said, returning to his tasks. Stew will take a bit longer. The rich aroma of coffee soon filled the cabin, and August poured a cup for Hannah, adding a generous spoonful of sugar from her own canister. She wrapped her cold hands around the warm mug, inhaling deeply before taking a sip. The hot liquid burned a path down her throat, awakening sensations beyond grief for the first time in days. Thank you, she said simply. August nodded, pouring himself a cup and settling into the chair across from her. When's the last time you ate, Hannah? She shook her head. I don't remember. You need to keep up your strength. For what? The question slipped out before she could stop it, raw and honest. August studied her over the rim of his cup. For tomorrow and the day after that. I don't want tomorrow, Hannah whispered. Not without him, I know. August's voice was low, understanding, but it comes anyway. They sat in silence as the stew simmered, filling the cabin with savory smells that reminded Hannah's body of its hunger, even if her mind rejected the idea of nourishment. When August finally ladled the stew into bowls and placed one before her, she found herself picking up the spoon almost against her will. The first bite nearly made her gasp, flavors exploding on her tongue after days of tasting nothing but tears. She took another spoonful, then another, suddenly ravenous. August ate more slowly, watching with approval as color gradually returned to her cheeks. There's plenty more, he said when she emptied her bowl. He refilled it without waiting for her to ask, then replenished their coffee cups. As the food warmed her from within, Hannah became more aware of her surroundings and her own state. Her dress was filthy, her hair tangled, her face unwashed. Self-consciousness crept in for the first time since Samuel's death. I must look a fright, she murmured, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You look like someone who's been through hell, August replied matter-of-factly. No shame in that. His lack of judgment eased her embarrassment. Still, I should at least wash up, if you'll excuse me. Hannah rose and moved to the washstand, pouring water from the pitcher into the basin. The cold water shocked her as she splashed it over her face, but it felt cleansing, washing away days of dried tears and grief sweat. She combed her fingers through her tangled hair, wishing for a proper brush but unwilling to go to her bedroom to fetch one. When she returned to the table, August had cleared away their dishes and was smoking a hand-rolled cigarette by the open door, politely keeping the smoke outside. The domesticity of the scene struck Hannah with unexpected force. How long had it been since she'd shared an evening meal with an adult, engaged in simple conversation? Your place here, August said as she seated herself again. You managing it alone, Hannah sighed. Trying to. Since Daniel died, I've hired help when I could afford it, mostly for the heavy work mending fences, bringing in hay, that sort of thing. How many head of cattle? Just 8 now. We lost 3 to wolves last winter. The 2 in the corral are milk cows. August nodded thoughtfully. Enough to get by if the winter's not too harsh. It's not much, Hannah admitted. But it's ours, was ours, she corrected herself, the pain fresh again at the reminder that her family had dwindled to just herself. Your land's good, August observed. Saw that coming in. Right amount of water, decent grazing, could support more cattle with the right management. Hannah smiled wryly. You sound like Daniel. He had big plans for this place. 20 head of cattle, maybe horses too, but then the winter of '76 came and She trailed off, the familiar grief of her husband's death now layered beneath the rawer pain of losing Samuel. I'm sorry, August said again, flicking his cigarette into the darkness outside before closing the door against the night chill. Didn't mean to bring up painful memories. Everything is a painful memory now, Hannah replied softly. But you're right about the land. It deserves better than I've been able to give it. August seemed to consider his next words carefully. I'm heading up to Montana, was planning to look for work at one of the big spreads up there for the winter. But I could stay on a few days if you'd like. Help get things in order before the snow flies. Hannah's first instinct was to refuse. She'd managed barely since Daniel died, accepting help only when absolutely necessary. Pride had kept her going when despair threatened to overwhelm her, but now, with Samuel gone too, pride seemed a hollow thing to cling to. I can't pay much, she said finally. Maybe $1 a day in meals. Fair enough. August nodded, seeming relieved at her acceptance. I'll sleep in the barn, get started at first light. There's a cot in the lean-to off the kitchen, Hannah offered. Daniel built it for ranch hands. It's nothing fancy, but it's out of the weather. That's more than generous, August said, rising from the table. If you'll show me where it is, I'll get out of your way so you can rest. Hannah led him to the small room adjacent to the kitchen. It was sparse, just a narrow cot, a 3-legged stool and a peg for hanging clothes, but it was clean and dry. August set his saddlebags on the floor and his hat on the stool. This will do just fine, he assured her. Thank you, Hannah. Standing in the doorway, Hannah suddenly felt awkward. This man was still a stranger, yet he'd shown her more kindness in a few hours than she'd experienced in months. I should be thanking you, August, for the flowers, the meal, for seeing me when I was invisible. A complicated expression crossed his face, something between understanding and a deeper emotion she couldn't name. Get some rest, he said gently. Tomorrow's soon enough to face the world again. Hannah nodded and retreated to her bedroom, closing the door with a soft click. She changed into her nightgown, the simple act requiring more energy than she would have thought possible. As she slipped between the cold sheets, she realized with a pang that this was the first night she would sleep without checking on Samuel, without kissing his forehead or tucking his blankets around his small shoulders. Tears came again, but quieter now, no longer the racking sobs that had torn through her body for days. Outside her window, the moon rose over the Wyoming landscape, casting silver light across the small grave on the hill. Hannah watched it until her eyes grew heavy, and for the first time since her world had shattered, she slept deeply, dreamlessly, her body surrendering to exhaustion. The morning light filtering through the curtains woke Hannah hours later. For one blessed moment, she existed in the liminal space between sleep and full consciousness before memory crashed back into her awareness. Samuel was gone. But something else was different: sounds from the kitchen, the smell of coffee brewing, the distant clank of metal against metal from outside. August, the cowboy with the wildflowers. Hannah rose and dressed quickly in her cleanest work dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been quite pretty. She splashed water on her face and pinned her hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. The woman who looked back at her from the small mirror above her washstand was a stranger, hollow-cheeked, eyes shadowed with grief, but somehow more present than she had been the day before. When Hannah emerged from her bedroom, she found the kitchen empty but a pot of coffee keeping warm on the stove and a plate of biscuits covered with a cloth on the table. Through the open door, she could see August in the corral with the milk cows, examining one's hoof as the animal stood patiently. Hannah poured herself coffee and took a biscuit, eating it slowly as she watched August work, He moved with confidence around the animals, speaking to them in low tones she couldn't make out. The simple sight of someone else tending to her responsibilities loosened something in her chest, not erasing her grief, but making space alongside it for other feelings. Relief, gratitude, even a flicker of hope that perhaps she could find a way forward through this darkness. When August noticed her standing in the doorway, he set down the cow's hoof and approached the cabin, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning," he greeted her, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "Hope you don't mind me starting without you. Thought you could use the rest." "I don't mind," Hannah replied, offering him the coffee pot as he climbed the porch steps. "Thank you for the biscuits." "They're nothing special," August said, accepting the coffee gratefully, "but they'll keep body and soul together." Hannah leaned against the doorframe, cradling her own cup. "How are the cows?" "The older one's got a split in her hoof that needs tending. I'll clean it out, pack it with tar. The younger one seems healthy enough, just underfed." He took a long drink of coffee. "Your mule's favoring his left foreleg, but it doesn't look serious, probably just stiff." Hannah nodded, absorbing the information. These were problems she should have noticed, would have noticed if grief hadn't consumed her. "What else needs doing?" August glanced around the homestead. "Well, your roof could use some patching before the snow comes. The barn's sound enough, but that north corner of the corral won't last the winter. And you'll need more firewood split and stacked." It was a daunting list, but August recited it matter-of-factly without judgment or pity. Just work that needed doing, nothing more. "I can help," Hannah said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm stronger than I look." August's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I don't doubt it for a minute, but maybe start slow. Been a few days since you've done much besides grieve." His gentle understanding nearly broke her resolve, but Hannah swallowed hard and nodded. "I'll start with the morning milking then. You work on that hoof." For the rest of the morning, they settled into a rhythm of work, Hannah tending to the familiar tasks of milking and egg gathering while August repaired the cow's hoof and reinforced the corral. They spoke little, but the silence was companionable rather than strained. Hannah found that focusing on physical tasks kept the worst of the grief at bay, though several times she had to stop and press her hand to her mouth when a memory of Samuel ambushed her, his delight at helping collect eggs, his small hands reaching for the milk bucket. At midday, Hannah prepared a simple meal of cornbread and beans with slices of salt pork to add flavor. As they ate at the kitchen table, August broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "That hill where your boy is buried," he began carefully. "It's a fine spot. But the markers like to wash away in the first heavy rain." Hannah's hand stilled with her spoon halfway to her mouth. "I know," she whispered. "I haven't had the heart to think about it." "I could build something more permanent," August offered. "A proper headstone's beyond my skills, but I could make a cross that would weather the years. Oak maybe, with his name carved in." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, but she blinked them back. "You would do that, be an honor," August said simply. "Every soul deserves to be remembered properly." Hannah set down her spoon, overcome. "Yes," she managed finally. "Yes, I would be grateful." August nodded, accepting her answer without making more of the moment than she could bear. "I'll look for suitable wood this afternoon then, after I've patched that roof." True to his word, August spent the afternoon making repairs to the cabin roof, working with materials he found in Daniel's old workshop behind the barn. Hannah busied herself with household tasks that had been neglected for days, washing dishes, sweeping floors, airing bedding. She deliberately left Samuel's bed untouched, unable yet to face the task of packing away his few possessions. By sunset, the immediate repairs were complete, and August had identified a section of oak from a fallen tree on the property's edge that would serve for the grave marker. They ate supper rabbit stew that August had prepared from an animal he'd snared in the afternoon, and discussed what needed doing the next day. "Weather's holding," August observed, glancing out the window at the clear sky. "Good time to get that firewood cut and stacked." Hannah nodded, pushing the last of her stew around her bowl. August, she said hesitantly, may I ask you something personal? He looked surprised but nodded. Of course. You mentioned losing your sister, is that why you? She struggled to frame her question. Why you stopped to help a stranger? Because you know what grief feels like. August set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. Partly, I suppose. Eliza was 7 when typhoid took her. I was 12, old enough to understand but young enough that adults thought I didn't need the comfort they gave my mother. He looked down at his scarred, work-roughened hands. But it's more than that. Out here, folks have to look after each other. No one makes it alone. Some try, Hannah said softly, thinking of her own stubborn independence since Daniel's death. Some try, August agreed with a small smile, but even the strongest need help sometimes. His words settled around Hannah like a warm blanket, not dismissing her grief, but acknowledging that accepting help didn't diminish her. For the first time since Samuel's death, she felt something other than despair, a tiny flicker of connection to another human being who understood loss. Thank you, she said simply. August nodded, understanding everything she couldn't put into words. That night, Hannah slept better than the night before, though she woke once in the darkest hours, certain she'd heard Samuel calling for her. The cruel reality of his absence hit her anew, and she pressed her face into the pillow to muffle her sobs. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her again, and she slept until dawn light touched her window. When she rose, she found August had already been up for hours. A stack of freshly split firewood was growing beside the cabin, and the sound of his axe rang rhythmically through the crisp morning air. Hannah watched him from the window for a moment, his strong shoulders moving with each swing, the precise way he positioned each log before bringing the axe down. There was something reassuring about his methodical work, about knowing that warmth for the winter was being secured through his efforts. After a breakfast of leftover biscuits and the last of the coffee, August turned his attention to crafting the grave marker while Hannah tended to the animals and garden. By midday, he had shaped the oak into a sturdy cross and was carefully carving Samuel's name into the horizontal beam. Would you like to add anything else? He asked Hannah when she brought him a cup of water. Dates, or a saying maybe? Hannah traced her fingers over the letters of her son's name neatly cut into the wood. Samuel Blackwell, beloved son, she said after a moment. And the dates, April 12, 1873, to October 19, 1878. August nodded and returned to his carving, each stroke of the knife deliberate and respectful. Hannah watched for a while before returning to her own tasks, finding a strange comfort in the knowledge that her son's resting place would now have a marker worthy of his memory. Late that afternoon, they walked together to the grave on the hillside. August carried the finished cross and a shovel, while Hannah brought a bunch of late asters she'd found growing in a sheltered spot near the creek. The wind had died down, leaving the hill in peaceful silence as August carefully positioned the cross at the head of the small grave and drove it deep into the earth. Hannah laid the flowers against the fresh oak, their purple blooms bright against the golden wood. It's beautiful, she said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. Thank you, August. He stood beside her, hat in hand, his face solemn. You want some time alone with him? Hannah shook her head. No, I've spent too much time alone already. She touched the carved letters of Samuel's name once more, then straightened. He would have liked you, I think. He was always following the ranch hands around, wanting to be a cowboy. August smiled sadly. Sounds like a fine boy. He was. Hannah took a deep breath. The best part of me. They stood together in silence for a few minutes more, then walked back to the cabin as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The air held the bite of approaching winter, reminding Hannah of all that still needed to be done before snow blanketed the land. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, August cleared his throat. I was thinking, he began, somewhat hesitantly, about your cattle situation. Hannah looked up from the sock she was darning. What about it? 8 head isn't enough to make this place profitable, especially with winter coming. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But I heard in town yesterday that the McAllister spread is selling off some of their young stock cheap. They're overstocked for their winter feed. Hannah's hands stilled. I can't afford more cattle, August. I'm barely keeping these fed. That's just it, he said, his eyes alight with an idea. The price is right and your land can support more. With proper management, you could double your herd by spring. Proper management requires money I don't have, Hannah pointed out, though something in his enthusiasm sparked a forgotten feeling in her opportunity. I've been thinking on that too, August continued. What if I wintered here? Worked for room and board plus a small percentage of the spring increase. I could help build up your herd, make repairs to the place, get you set for a proper fresh start come spring. Hannah stared at him, taken aback by the offer. You'd stay the winter, but I thought you were heading to Montana. August shrugged. Montana will still be there next year, and honestly, the big spreads up their work a man near to death for poor wages. He hesitated, then added more quietly, besides, I'd rest easier knowing you weren't facing the winter alone, not just after losing your boy. Hannah's chest tightened at his words. Part of her wanted to insist she could manage on her own the same part that had kept her going after Daniel died, that had refused to admit defeat even when the odds were stacked against her. But another part, a wiser part perhaps, recognized that August's offer made practical sense. Her homestead needed work she couldn't do alone, and expanding the herd could mean the difference between scraping by and actually thriving. And beyond the practical considerations, the thought of facing the long, dark winter months alone in the cabin, with only Samuel's absence for company, made her heart sink. It wouldn't be proper, she said finally, voicing the concern that society would certainly raise. A widow living alone with a single man. August nodded, acknowledging the point. I understand. Maybe we could work something out with one of the neighbor ladies coming to stay, or I could build a separate cabin for myself a bit away from the main house. His willingness to consider her reputation touched Hannah. The nearest neighbors are 5 miles away, she said, and building another cabin before winter would be impossible. She twisted the darning needle between her fingers, thinking, but if you stayed in the lean-to and we were. Careful about appearances when others were around. I'd respect your boundaries absolutely, August assured her, his expression serious. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more. Hannah nodded, making her decision. All right, until spring then. Room and board plus 5% of the spring increase. 10%, August countered with a slight smile. I drive a hard bargain. Despite everything, Hannah found herself smiling back. 7% and that's my final offer. Done. August extended his hand, and Hannah shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm and the gentle strength in his grip. A business arrangement, she reminded herself. Nothing more. Yet as August outlined his plans for improving the homestead and building up the herd, Hannah couldn't help noticing the way the firelight caught in his beard, or how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, or the careful way he listened when she spoke. Stop it, she told herself firmly. Your husband is 2 years in the ground, your son not yet cold beside him. This is no time for such thoughts. Still, as she bid August good night and retired to her bedroom, Hannah found herself grateful not just for his practical help, but for his presence solid and reassuring in a world that had become terrifyingly uncertain. The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost silvering the grass and glittering on the cabin roof. Hannah rose early, determined to make a proper breakfast to start their new working arrangement. She was kneading dough for biscuits when August appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair damp from washing at the outdoor pump. Morning, he greeted her, crossing to the stove to pour himself coffee from the pot she'd already prepared. Smells good in here. Just biscuits and bacon, Hannah replied, cutting the dough into rounds. Nothing fancy. Fancy isn't necessary when you're hungry, August said with a smile, leaning against the counter. I'm heading into town today to talk to McAllister about those cattle. Need anything while I'm there? Hannah considered. She rarely went to town, finding the pitying looks from the townspeople hard to bear after Daniel's death. Now, with Samuel gone too, the thought of facing their well-meaning sympathy was unbearable. "Some coffee beans, if you don't mind, and maybe some sugar." "I can give you the money," August nodded. "I'll add it to my list." He hesitated, then added, "Might be good if I mention to a few folks our arrangement. Head off any gossip before it starts." Hannah appreciated his foresight. Frontier communities could be surprisingly tolerant of unconventional living arrangements when necessity dictated, but they could also be quick to judge, especially when a woman's reputation was concerned. "That's probably wise. You could speak to Reverend Taylor. If he understands the situation, others will follow his lead." "Good thinking," August agreed. He finished his coffee and set the cup aside. "I'll hitch the mule to the wagon, should be back by sundown." As August prepared for the journey into town, Hannah finished the biscuits and set them to bake, then went to milk the cows. The morning routine felt different, somehow not easier, exactly, but less overwhelming with the knowledge that she wasn't facing everything alone. When August departed, the wagon rattling down the rutted track that led to the main road, Hannah turned her attention to the cabin. If August was to stay the winter, the lean-to needed proper outfitting. She found an extra quilt in her trunk, aired it on the clothesline, and added it to the narrow cot. A small table and lamp from the main room could be spared, and she moved them into the lean-to as well. The work kept her hands busy and her mind from dwelling too deeply on her grief, though several times throughout the day, Hannah found herself stopping, overcome by a sudden memory of Samuel, his laughter when he discovered a frog by the creek, his serious expression as he tried to help her knead bread dough, his small hand trustingly in hers as they walked the property boundaries. Each memory brought tears, but they were quieter now, tinged with love as much as loss. In the afternoon, Hannah visited Samuel's grave, sitting beside the new oak cross and telling him about August's plans for the homestead. "He's a good man, Sammy," she said softly, running her fingers over the carved letters of his name. "Kind like your papa was. He's going to help us get through the winter." The thought that Samuel would never see another winter, never build another snowman or catch snowflakes on his tongue, threatened to overwhelm her. But Hannah took a deep breath and continued her one-sided conversation, finding comfort in speaking to her son as if he could still hear her. As promised, August returned just before sunset, the wagon loaded with supplies, sacks of feed, tools, and provisions for the cabin. Most surprisingly, a small crate containing 6 young chickens sat in the back, clucking indignantly at the bumpy ride. "Chickens?" Hannah asked as August lifted the crate down. "McAllister threw them in with the cattle deal," August explained. "Thought they'd give you fresh eggs through the winter. There's a rooster among them too, so you'll have chicks come spring." Hannah peered into the crate at the red and black hens, touched by August's thoughtfulness. Fresh eggs would be a welcome addition to their winter diet. "Where are the cattle?" "McAllister's bringing them over tomorrow," August replied, unloading a sack of flour. 8 had 4 heifers and 4 steers, all yearlings. Good stock, got them for a fair price too. 8, Hannah's eyes widened. "August, that doubles our herd. How did you manage it?" August looked pleased with himself. "McAllister owed me a favor from a few years back." And I may have mentioned that the widow Blackwell was getting back on her feet after a terrible loss. He's a decent man beneath that gruff exterior. Hannah wasn't sure whether to be embarrassed that August had used her situation to negotiate a better deal or grateful for his resourcefulness. She settled on the latter, helping him unload the remaining supplies and carry them into the cabin. "There's something else," August said as they finished, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small paper-wrapped package and handed it to Hannah. "For you." Hannah unwrapped the paper to find a carved wooden horse, small enough to fit in her palm, expertly crafted with flowing mane and alert ears. "It's beautiful," she said, running her finger over the smooth surface. "But I don't understand." "Saw it at the general store," August explained, suddenly looking self-conscious. Made me think of what you said about Samuel wanting to be a cowboy. He cleared his throat. Thought maybe you'd like something to remember him by, something you could hold on to. But if it's too painful, no, Hannah interrupted, closing her fingers around the little horse. No, it's perfect. Thank you, August. The gift was thoughtful in a way that struck her to the core, not just acknowledging her loss, but honoring who Samuel had been, what he had loved. August nodded, seeming relieved. Well, those chickens need a coop. I'll get started on that before it gets dark. As August set to work converting a corner of the barn into a chicken coop, Hannah prepared supper, the little wooden horse sitting on the shelf above the stove where she could see it as she worked. Its presence wasn't a replacement for Samuel, nothing could be that, but it was a tangible reminder that her son had been real, had been loved, and would be remembered not just by her, but by someone who had never even met him. The next day brought McAllister with the cattle as promised. He was a burly man with a bushy beard and shrewd eyes that softened when he saw Hannah. Mrs. Blackwell, he greeted her, hat in hand. Mighty sorry about your boy, town's been praying for you. Hannah managed to thank him, her throat tight, as August stepped in to handle the business details. The new cattle were indeed fine animals, well-formed and healthy, if a bit thin after the summer drought. August and McAllister drove them into the pasture, where they immediately began grazing on the late autumn grass. You've got a good man there, McAllister commented to Hannah before he left, nodding toward August, who was checking the fence line. Calloway's known for his word being as good as gold. If he says he'll see you through winter, you can bank on it. Hannah nodded, not correcting McAllister's assumption about the nature of her relationship with August. Let him think what he would, the truth was complicated enough without trying to explain it to others. As the days turned into weeks, Hannah and August settled into a rhythm of work and quiet companionship. The immediate tasks of winter preparation consumed their days harvesting the last of the garden vegetables, smoking meat, canning preserves, repairing fences and outbuildings. August built a sturdy chicken coop and reinforced the barn roof, while Hannah sewed heavy curtains for the windows to keep out drafts and darned socks and shirts in the evenings by the fire. They spoke little of personal matters, focusing instead on the practical aspects of running the homestead. Yet Hannah found herself watching August when he wasn't looking, the careful way he handled tools, the gentleness he showed to animals, the quiet competence that infused everything he did. Sometimes she caught him watching her too, a thoughtful expression on his face that he quickly masked when she noticed. November brought the first snow, a light dusting that melted by midday but served as a warning of the winter to come. August doubled his efforts on the firewood, building a massive stack against the side of the cabin. Hannah added extra straw to the animal bedding and hung dried herbs from the rafters, remedies for the inevitable winter illnesses. It was during the second week of November, as they sat by the fire after supper, that August finally asked the question Hannah had been dreading. "Tell me about Samuel," he said quietly, setting aside the bridle he'd been mending. "If you want to, that is. Sometimes it helps to talk about them." Hannah's hands stilled on the shirt she was patching. Her first instinct was to change the subject, to protect the raw wound of Samuel's absence. But something in August's expression, open, genuinely interested, without pity, made her reconsider. "He was born during the worst thunderstorm I've ever seen," she began hesitantly. "Daniel had gone for the midwife, but the creek flooded and he couldn't get back. I delivered Samuel myself, just the two of us in this cabin while lightning struck all around." A small smile touched her lips at the memory. He came into the world during one tremendous thunderclap, eyes wide open, not even crying, just looking around like he was curious about everything from the very start. August smiled, encouraging her to continue. "He was always like that, curious, fearless. Drove me to distraction sometimes, the way he'd wander off exploring." Hannah's voice caught, but she pressed on. "He looked like Daniel, same dark hair and eyes, but he had my stubborn streak. Once he set his mind to something, wild horses couldn't turn him aside. A good quality in these parts, August observed. Hannah nodded. He loved animals, had a pet frog he kept in a jar for 3 days before I made him release it. Cried like his heart would break, then stopped the moment he saw a butterfly. She laughed softly at the memory. He felt everything so deeply, but he bounced back so quickly too. Children are resilient that way, August said. My sister was the same. Could be sobbing 1 minute and laughing the next. Tell me about her, Hannah said, realizing August rarely spoke of his own past. He looked surprised at the question, then thoughtful. Eliza was a little sprite of a thing. Blonde curls, blue eyes full of mischief. 4 years younger than me, but she had me wrapped around her finger from the day she was born. His expression softened with the memory. She used to collect wildflowers, whole armfuls of them. Mother would scold her for getting her dresses stained with pollen, but she couldn't resist. Like the flowers you brought to Samuel's grave, Hannah said quietly. August nodded. Exactly like that. Guess that's why I thought of it. He stared into the fire for a long moment. Typhoid swept through our town when I was 12, took Eliza and my father both. Mother was never the same after. I'm sorry, Hannah said, understanding all too well how loss could reshape a life. It was a long time ago, August replied, though his eyes said otherwise. But I still think of her sometimes, wonder what kind of woman she would have grown into. I do that with Samuel, Hannah admitted. Try to imagine him at 10, at 15, as a man. It's hard losing someone before their time, August said. Before they've had a chance to become all they might have been. They fell silent, each lost in their own memories, the fire crackling between them. But the silence wasn't heavy with grief as Hannah might have expected. Instead, there was a strange comfort in sharing memories with someone who understood, who didn't try to minimize her loss or rush her through her pain. Thank you, she said finally, for asking about him, for wanting to know. August looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the firelight. Thank you for telling me. He sounds like a remarkable boy. He was, Hannah said, and for the first time, using the past tense didn't feel like a betrayal. The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Having shared their deepest losses, a new layer of understanding developed between them. They began to speak more freely in the evenings, August telling stories of his years on the trail. Cattle drives from Texas to Kansas. Encounters with Indians and outlaws, the beauty of landscapes few white men had seen. Hannah shared memories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her journey west with Daniel after their marriage, the hardships and joys of carving a home from the wilderness. As November deepened toward December, the weather turned harsh. Snow fell in earnest, blanketing the homestead in white silence. August kept the paths to the barn and well cleared, checked the cattle daily, and maintained a steady supply of firewood. Hannah cooked hearty meals, tended the chickens, which were now providing eggs regularly, and worked on a surprise for August, a new shirt made from fabric she'd been saving for Samuel's school clothes. The shirt project gave Hannah purpose during the long winter evenings, and she found herself looking forward to the moment when August would open the package she planned to give him for Christmas. It had been years since she'd had reason to celebrate the holiday properly. Daniel had never been one for observances, and after his death, she'd maintained only the simplest traditions for Samuel's sake. But now, with August's steady presence filling the empty spaces of the cabin, Hannah felt a forgotten anticipation stirring. 2 weeks before Christmas, a blizzard descended on the homestead, howling winds driving snow against the cabin walls and transforming the familiar landscape into an alien white wasteland. August spent the morning securing the animals in the barn, making sure they had ample food and water in case the storm lasted for days. When he finally returned to the cabin, his beard and eyebrows were crusted with ice, his cheeks raw from the cold. Here, Hannah said, pressing a mug of hot coffee into his hands as he stamped snow from his boots. Warm yourself before you catch your death. August accepted the coffee gratefully, moving to stand by the stove. Animals are settled, should be fine for a few days if need be. He took a long drink, Storm's bad, haven't seen one like this in years. Hannah peered out the window at the swirling whiteness, a tendril of anxiety working its way through her chest. Will the cattle be all right? They've got the south pasture with the windbreak. They'll bunch together for warmth. August rubbed his hands together near the stove. It's the cold after the storm I'm worried about. Temperature drops like that, we could lose some. Hannah nodded, understanding the concern. Cattle could survive snow, even heavy snow. But the bitter cold that often followed a blizzard could be deadly, especially to the younger animals. As the day wore on, the storm intensified. Wind found every crack in the cabin walls, sending drafts curling around their ankles despite the heavy curtains and banked fire. By evening, the temperature inside the cabin had dropped noticeably, and Hannah brought out extra quilts for them both. Might be wise to sleep in the main room tonight, August suggested as darkness fell, the storm showing no signs of abating. Close off the bedrooms, keep the heat concentrated where the stove is. Hannah hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The practicality of the suggestion outweighed any concerns about propriety. No one would be traveling in this weather anyway. And the bitter cold was a more immediate threat than gossip. They arranged their bedding on opposite sides of the main room, August on a pallet near the door, Hannah on the small sofa by the stove. The wind howled relentlessly, finding new ways into the cabin as the temperature outside continued to drop. Despite the fire burning steadily and the quilts piled over her, Hannah couldn't stop shivering. "You all right?" August asked through the darkness, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Just cold," Hannah replied, teeth chattering. "I'll be fine." There was a rustling as August rose from his pallet. A moment later, she felt another quilt being draped over his own, she realized. "August, no, you need that, I'm fine," he insisted. "Used to sleeping rough. This is luxury compared to some of the places I've bedded down." Before Hannah could argue further, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the window beside her, sending a blast of cold air through the frame. She gasped, pulling the quilts tighter. "That settles it," August muttered. "Hannah, forgive me for suggesting this, but in weather like this, settlers survive by sharing body heat. I can move my pallet closer to the stove, next to the sofa. We'll each keep to our own bedding, but the proximity will help." The suggestion made perfect sense from a survival standpoint. Hannah had heard stories of families huddling together during Dakota blizzards, of travelers spooning with strangers in snowbound cabins. Still, the thought of lying so close to August, even with separate bedding between them, sent a flush of warmth through her that had nothing to do with temperature. "All right," she agreed finally, knowing that pride was a poor substitute for warmth on a night like this. "It's the sensible thing to do." August moved his pallet beside the sofa, close enough that Hannah could hear his breathing but not so close that they were touching. He returned to his own quilts, and gradually the combined warmth of their bodies created a pocket of bearable temperature in the freezing cabin. "Better?" August asked after a few minutes. "Yes," Hannah admitted, her shivering subsiding. "Thank you. Try to get some sleep," he advised. "Storm might last a couple of days." Hannah closed her eyes, listening to the wind and August's steady breathing beside her. Despite the howling blizzard, she felt oddly safe, protected not just by the cabin walls but by the presence of this man who had become, against all expectations, a friend. The storm did indeed last for 2 days, keeping them confined to the cabin except for brief excursions to check on the animals. They passed the time with practical tasks, August repairing tools and harnesses, Hannah mending clothes and baking bread when their supplies ran low. In the evenings, August taught Hannah to play checkers with a set he fashioned from wood scraps, and she read aloud from her small collection of books, mostly practical manuals for farming and housekeeping, but also a volume of Tennyson's poetry that had been a wedding gift from her parents. On the third morning, they awoke to silence, the blessed absence of wind that signaled the storm's end. August was the first to venture outside, returning with news that the cattle had survived, though two of the younger animals were showing signs of cold stress and would need extra attention. The days following the blizzard were busy with recovery efforts, clearing paths, breaking ice on the creek so the cattle could drink, repairing storm damage to the outbuildings. But in the evenings, Hannah and August continued the pattern established during their confinement, sharing the main room's warmth and conversation that grew increasingly personal as their trust in each other deepened. It was during one of these evenings, a week before Christmas, that August revealed more of his past. "I was married once," he said quietly as they sat by the fire, Hannah working on his Christmas shirt while August whittled a small wooden toy, a present for the children at the orphanage in town. He'd explained. "Long time ago now, her name was Catherine." Hannah looked up, surprised. August had never mentioned a wife before. "What happened?" she asked gently, August's hands stilled on his carving. "Childbirth, both she and the baby died." He spoke matter-of-factly, but Hannah could see the old pain in his eyes. "We'd been married just over a year. I was 22, thought I had everything figured out, had a small place in Nebraska, was going to raise horses." He shook his head. "After I buried them, I couldn't stay, sold the place, took to the trail, been drifting ever since." "I'm sorry, August," Hannah said, understanding now why he'd responded so deeply to her own grief, why he'd stopped to bring flowers to a stranger's grave. "How long ago was that?" 15 years, give or take," August replied. "Long enough that the sharp edges have worn down." "But you never really get over losing someone like that, just learn to live with the hole they leave behind." Hannah nodded, knowing the truth of his words. "That's why you never settled anywhere again, because of Catherine?" August considered the question. "Partly, I suppose. But also because I never found a reason to. The trail's been good to me in its way, always something new over the next horizon, always work for a man willing to do it." He resumed his whittling, shaving delicate curls from the wooden horse's mane. "But I'm getting older. Starting to think maybe it's time to put down roots again." There was something in his voice that made Hannah's heart beat faster. She kept her eyes on her sewing, not trusting herself to look at him directly. "Where would you go? Back to Nebraska?" "No," August said softly. "Too many ghosts there." "But Wyoming suits me. Good cattle country, beautiful in its own harsh way." Hannah nodded, aware of the implications hanging in the air between them but unwilling to acknowledge them directly. It was too soon for both of them. "It grows on you," she agreed. "I hated it when we first arrived. So different from Pennsylvania, the emptiness of it, the wind that never stops. But now I can't imagine living anywhere else." August smiled, seeming to understand her need to step back from the precipice of deeper conversation. "It's a land that demands respect. Gives nothing easily but rewards those who persevere. Like its people," Hannah observed, returning his smile. "Exactly like its people," August agreed, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary before returning to his carving. The week before Christmas passed quickly, filled with the routine tasks of winter survival and preparations for the holiday. August made a special trip to town, returning with small luxuries: oranges, candy sticks for the Christmas stockings Hannah had hung by the fireplace, a bottle of wine for Christmas dinner. Hannah, in turn, used precious sugar and dried fruit to bake a special cake, hiding it in the cold pantry where August wouldn't see it before the holiday. On Christmas Eve, they worked together to bring in a small pine tree, which they set up in a corner of the main room and decorated with paper chains Hannah had made and dried apple slices cut into stars. As darkness fell, they lit candles on the tree, a tradition from Hannah's childhood that she hadn't observed since Daniel's death. "It's beautiful," August said as they stood back to admire their work, the candles casting a warm glow over the simple room. "Been a long time since I celebrated Christmas properly." "Me too," Hannah admitted. "Last year was difficult. Samuel was so excited about Christmas, but Daniel had just died and I could barely manage the everyday tasks, let alone make the holiday special." She smiled sadly. "Samuel never complained though, said having me was present enough." August rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. He sounds like he was a wise soul in a small body. He was, Hannah agreed, allowing herself to lean slightly into August's touch. I think he would have liked this. The tree, the stockings, having someone to share it with. The moment hung between them, weighted with unspoken feelings. Then August's hand dropped away and he moved toward the kitchen. Almost forgot I made some cider earlier. Should be warm by now. He returned with 2 mugs of spiced cider, and they settled into their usual places by the fire. Outside, the night was clear and bitterly cold, stars sharp as glass shards in the black sky. Inside, the cabin was warm with firelight and the scent of pine. "I have something for you," August said after they had sipped their cider in companionable silence for a while. "Was going to wait until tomorrow, but—" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. Hannah set aside her mug. "August, you didn't have to, I wanted to," he interrupted gently, handing her the package. "Go on, open it." Hannah carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she found blank pages of good quality paper. "A journal," August nodded. "Thought you might want to write down your memories of Samuel, the stories, the little things about him, so they don't fade with time." Hannah ran her fingers over the smooth leather cover, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "August, thank you, it's perfect." "There's something else," he said, reaching into his other pocket. "This one's more practical." The second package contained a silver locket on a delicate chain. Hannah opened it to find it empty, waiting for contents. "It's beautiful," she said, looking up at August questioningly. "Thought maybe you'd want something to keep a lock of his hair in," August explained. "My mother had one with Eliza's hair, said it brought her comfort, having a piece of her daughter close to her heart." Tears filled Hannah's eyes at the gesture. She'd cut a lock of Samuel's hair before they buried him, keeping it wrapped in a handkerchief in her bureau drawer. The idea of having it with her always in this beautiful locket was overwhelming in its rightness. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, closing her hand around the locket. "These gifts, they're so thoughtful, so perfect." August looked slightly embarrassed by her emotion. "Just wanted to give you something meaningful, not much use for trinkets out here." "I have something for you too," Hannah said, rising to retrieve the wrapped shirt from its hiding place in her sewing basket. "It's not as thoughtful as your gifts, I'm afraid." August unwrapped the package carefully, his eyes widening as he unfolded the shirt. It was made of sturdy blue cotton with double stitching at the seams and mother-of-pearl buttons that Hannah had salvaged from one of Daniel's old dress shirts. "Hannah, this must have taken you hours." "I had the time," she said, pleased by his reaction, "and you needed a new one." "That old gray one you're wearing is more patch than original fabric." August ran his hand over the material, clearly touched. "No one's made me clothing since my mother, and that was 30 years ago." He looked up at her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Thank you, Hannah, it means more than I can say." The intensity of his gaze made Hannah's cheeks warm. "You're welcome," she said softly. "Merry Christmas, August." "Merry Christmas, Hannah," he replied, and for a moment she thought he might say more, might cross the invisible line they had drawn between themselves. Instead, he carefully refolded the shirt and set it aside. "Best get some sleep. Cattle will need tending early, Christmas or no." Hannah nodded, feeling both relieved and disappointed as they prepared for bed, returning to their separate sleeping areas now that the extreme cold of the blizzard had passed. As she lay in her bedroom, listening to August moving about in the lean-to, Hannah reflected on how different this Christmas Eve was from the last, still marked by loss. Yes, but also by unexpected companionship, by the tentative blooming of something that felt dangerously like hope. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, with new snow sparkling under a bright blue sky. They exchanged no more gifts, but the day held a festive feeling nonetheless, a special breakfast of pancakes with preserved strawberries, carols that Hannah sang while August hummed along, the Christmas cake served with the wine he'd brought from town. In the afternoon, they hitched the mule to the sleigh and drove to Samuel's grave, where Hannah placed a small wreath of pine boughs and red berries. "Merry Christmas, my sweet boy," she said, touching the oak cross that stood firm against the snow. "Mama misses you." August stood a respectful distance away, giving her privacy for this moment with her son. When Hannah rejoined him, he squeezed her hand briefly. "All right," she nodded. "Yes, it hurts, but differently now, less like drowning, more like carrying something heavy that I'm growing stronger beneath." August's expression showed perfect understanding. "That's how healing works, I think. The weight doesn't disappear, but you get better at bearing it." They drove back to the cabin in comfortable silence, the only sounds the jingle of the harness and the whisper of runners on snow. Hannah found herself studying August's profile against the winter landscape, the strong jaw partly hidden by his beard, the straight nose, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting against sun and wind. He was not conventionally handsome, perhaps, but his face had character, strength, and a fundamental kindness that she had come to rely on. The realization startled her that in just 2 months, this man had become essential to her well-being in ways that went beyond the practical help he provided. She looked away quickly when August turned to her, afraid her thoughts might show on her face. "Cold?" he asked, misinterpreting her sudden flush. "A little," Hannah lied, grateful for the excuse to pull her scarf higher around her face. August urged the mule to a faster pace. "We'll be home soon." Fire should still be going strong. Home. The word hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address. January brought the harshest weather of the winter, bone-chilling cold that froze water buckets solid within hours, and snow so deep that August had to dig tunnels to the barn and well. They lost 2 of the older cattle despite their best efforts, but the rest of the herd survived, huddled together in the sheltered corner of the pasture that August had reinforced with additional windbreaks. February brought slightly milder temperatures and the first stirrings of optimism. The days began to lengthen noticeably, and Hannah found herself planning for spring, which seeds to plant in the garden, whether to expand the chicken flock, how many calves they might expect from the breeding stock. She caught herself using "we" in these conversations with August, as if his presence at the homestead was a permanent arrangement rather than one that would end with winter. The truth was, Hannah couldn't imagine the homestead without August now. His steady presence had become as much a part of her daily life as the rhythm of chores and meals. In the evenings, he often read aloud from her small collection of books while she sewed or knitted, his deep voice bringing the words to life in a way they never had when she read silently to herself. Sometimes they played checkers or cards, August teaching her poker with beans as chips, since gambling with real money would have scandalized her Pennsylvania sensibilities. They still maintained certain boundaries August slept in the lean-to except during the coldest nights, when practical considerations again dictated shared quarters in the main room. They were careful about physical contact, limiting it to the occasional helping hand or brief touch of reassurance. But Hannah was acutely aware of August in a way that went beyond friendship or business partnership. She noticed things about him that she had no practical reason to observe: the way the corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher on the right when he smiled, how he always cut his bread into precise pieces before eating it, the particular rhythm of his footsteps when he crossed the porch. Whether August was equally aware of her, Hannah couldn't be certain. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster, but he always looked away quickly, returning to whatever task was at hand. He was unfailingly respectful, never presuming or overstepping, and Hannah was both grateful for his restraint and frustrated by it. March arrived with alternating periods of thaw and freeze, the first tentative signs of spring appearing between snowstorms. Green shoots pushed through the soil in sheltered spots, and the cattle began to look more energetic, anticipating fresh grass. August rode the property boundaries daily, checking fences and clearing winter debris from creeks to prevent flooding when the Maine snowmelt began. It was during one of these rides in mid-March that August discovered the first calf of the season, born to one of the McAllister heifers in a sheltered hollow away from the main herd. He returned to the cabin excited, his cheeks reddened from the cold wind. "First calf's on the ground," he announced as he stomped snow from his boots on the porch. "Healthy heifer, good size. Mother's doing fine too." Hannah looked up from the bread dough she was kneading, her face lighting with genuine pleasure at the news. "That's wonderful. Is she nursing?" "Strong as can be," August confirmed, hanging his coat by the door. "Another few weeks, we should have a regular nursery out there. McAllister said all the heifers were bred before he sold them to us." Us. The word hung in the air between them, a reminder of how intertwined their lives had become. "We should celebrate," Hannah said, pushing aside the complicated feelings the simple pronoun evoked. "I've been saving that last jar of blackberry preserves for a special occasion." August smiled, crossing to wash his hands at the basin. "A new calf is definitely worth celebrating. First of many, if we're lucky." That evening, they enjoyed fresh bread with the preserved blackberries, August declaring it better than any fancy restaurant meal he'd ever had. As they sat by the fire afterward, Hannah found herself thinking about the rapidly approaching spring and what it would mean for their arrangement. "The McAllisters are having a barn raising at the end of April," August mentioned, breaking the comfortable silence. "Old barn collapsed under the snow in January. They're hoping to have the new one up before calving season gets into full swing." Hannah nodded. Barn raisings were community events, with families coming from miles around to help. Men and older boys would do the actual construction work, while women prepared food and minded the younger children. "Are you planning to help?" "Thought I might," August replied. "McAllister's been a good neighbor, and it would be a chance for you to get out, see some other folks." "Must be tired of just my company after all these months." "Not at all," Hannah said quickly, then flushed at her own eagerness. "I mean, yes, it would be nice to see others, but I've appreciated your company very much, August." He looked pleased at her words. "Been a good winter," he agreed. "Better than I expected when I offered to stay on." There was an opening in his statement, an invitation for Hannah to inquire about his plans now that winter was ending. But something held her back, fear, perhaps, that his answer would be to move on as originally planned, or that he might feel obligated to stay if she expressed a desire for him to do so. Instead, she said, "The calves will start coming in earnest soon. We'll be busy." August nodded, accepting her redirection of the conversation. "I've been thinking about improvements for the corral, make it more suitable for the new mothers and calves. And that south pasture could use some clearing. There's good grass under all those fallen branches." They spent the rest of the evening discussing practical matters of the homestead, both carefully avoiding the larger question of what would happen when their agreement ended with the arrival of spring. But as Hannah lay in bed that night, listening to the wind rattling the windows, she found herself wondering if August might consider staying on not just through calving season but permanently. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Was she ready to open her heart again after losing so much? And even if she was, did August feel the same way? The last weeks of March brought a series of storms that delayed the true arrival of spring, keeping them confined to the homestead and focused on immediate concerns rather than future plans. April began with a dramatic thaw, temperatures rising so quickly that streams overflowed their banks and patches of earth appeared almost overnight where snowdrifts had stood for months. As the land awakened, so too did the pace of life on the homestead. Calves began arriving in earnest, sometimes 2 or 3 in a single day, keeping August busy with the herd while Hannah prepared the garden for planting and tended to the increasing flock of chickens, which had begun laying prolifically with the lengthening days. They worked from dawn to dusk, often too tired for more than brief conversation over supper before retiring early. But there was a satisfaction in the exhaustion, a sense of purpose and accomplishment that Hannah hadn't felt since before Daniel's death. The homestead was coming back to life around her, and she found herself coming back to life with it. One evening in mid-April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset after a particularly long day, August broached the subject they'd been avoiding. "Hannah," he began, his voice carefully neutral, "I've been thinking about our arrangement." Her heart stuttered in her chest, but she kept her expression composed. "Yes, spring's here now, more or less. Our agreement was that I'd stay through the winter." He looked out across the greening pasture, where new calves frolicked on still wobbly legs. "But there's still a lot to be done here. Calving season, spring planting, repairs to the north fence line." Hannah waited, hardly daring to breathe. "I'd like to stay on," August said finally, turning to look at her directly. "If you're amenable, same terms as before or whatever you think is fair." Relief washed through Hannah, followed immediately by a more complicated emotion. Was she disappointed that he'd framed his desire to stay in purely practical terms? Had she hoped for something more? "I'd be glad of the help," she said carefully. "There is a great deal to be done." August nodded, studying her face as if searching for something more. When she didn't elaborate, he looked away again. "All right then, we'll continue as we have been." A silence fell between them, not the comfortable quiet they usually shared, but something more strained, filled with unspoken thoughts. Hannah knew she should say more, should perhaps acknowledge the deeper currents running beneath their practical partnership, but the words stuck in her throat. It was too soon, she told herself. Too complicated. Better to maintain the safety of their current arrangement than risk ruining it with unwelcome feelings. "The McAllister barn raising is next Saturday," August said eventually, changing the subject. "Weather permitting." Hannah nodded, grateful for the shift. "I'll bake some pies to bring, Mrs. McAllister mentioned they were short on desserts when I saw her at the general store last month." They slipped back into safer topics: the health of the new calves, plans for expanding the garden, whether the creek might be running high enough to catch some fish. But something had changed between them. A door opened just a crack that neither was quite ready to walk through. The day of the McAllister barn raising dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the community gathering. Hannah rose early to finish her baking 3 apple pies and a batch of sugar cookies, while August hitched the wagon and loaded it with tools he thought might be useful for the construction. Hannah dressed with unusual care in her best dress, a dark blue calico that had once been quite fashionable. She hadn't worn it since before Samuel's death, and putting it on felt like stepping back into an earlier version of herself, one who cared about her appearance, who participated in community life rather than withdrawing from it. When she emerged from her bedroom, August was waiting by the door, dressed in clean clothes with his hair neatly combed and his beard trimmed. He stared at her for a moment before remembering himself. "You look nice," he said simply, but the appreciation in his eyes said more than his words. "Thank you," Hannah replied, a flush warming her cheeks. "It's been a while since I had occasion to wear anything but work clothes." The drive to the McAllister ranch took nearly 2 hours, giving them time to enjoy the spring landscape. The prairie was coming alive with early wildflowers, tiny blue and white blooms dotting the new grass. The occasional splash of bolder colors where a sheltered spot had allowed something larger to flourish. Hannah found herself pointing these out to August, who listened with genuine interest to her explanations of which plants were useful for medicine or cooking. "You know a lot about plants," he observed after she'd identified a patch of wild onions growing near a stream they crossed. Hannah smiled. "My grandmother was something of an herbalist back in Pennsylvania. She taught me which plants heal and which harm, how to use them properly." Her smile faded slightly. Those skills weren't much help when Samuel fell ill, though. The fever came on so suddenly, burned so hot. August reached across the wagon seat to briefly cover her hand with his. "Some sicknesses are beyond any medicine, Hannah. You mustn't blame yourself." She nodded, turning her hand to squeeze his before he withdrew it. "I know. In my head, I know that." but my heart still questions whether I could have done more. That's natural, August said. I still wonder if I could have saved Catherine if I'd gotten the doctor sooner, or if the baby might have lived if we'd been closer to town. He looked at her with deep understanding. But at some point, we have to accept that some things are beyond our control. Hannah nodded again, grateful for his understanding. As they continued their journey, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, and by the time they arrived at the McAllister Ranch, Hannah felt more at ease than she had in months at the prospect of facing her neighbors. The McAllister place was already bustling with activity when they pulled up. Men were gathered around the foundation of the new barn, examining plans and organizing tools, while women had set up tables under a stand of cottonwood trees, already laden with food for the midday meal. Children darted about playing tag, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. Hannah felt a momentary pang at the sight of the children, a sharp reminder of Samuel's absence. August, noticing her hesitation as they stopped the wagon, leaned close to murmur, "We can leave any time you want, just say the word." His concern touched her deeply. "I'll be all right," she assured him. "It's good to be among people again." Mrs. McAllister spotted them as they unloaded the wagon and hurried over, her round face beaming with welcome. "Hannah Blackwell, land's sake, it does my heart good to see you out and about." She embraced Hannah warmly before turning to August with a knowing smile. "And Mr. Calloway, been taking good care of our Hannah, have you?" Hannah felt herself flush at the implication in the older woman's tone, but August merely touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Done my best, madam." "Hannah's a strong woman, doesn't need much looking after," Mrs. McAllister laughed. "That's as may be, but everyone needs someone, especially out here." She linked her arm through Hannah's. "Come along, dear, the ladies are dying to see you. August, the men are gathering by the foundation. My Thomas could use a man with your experience." With that, they were separated. Hannah guided toward the group of women setting out food, August toward the men preparing to raise the barn's frame. As she greeted neighbors she hadn't seen in months, Hannah was surprised by the genuine warmth of their welcome. There was curiosity too, of course, about her arrangement with August, but it was expressed with frontier directness rather than judgment. "So, you and Calloway, eh, Mrs. Peterson, wife of the general store owner, asked as they arranged Hannah's pies on the dessert table. "Good man, from what Thomas says. Pays his bills prompt and doesn't drink to excess." "It's not like that," Hannah explained, though she found herself wondering why she was so quick to deny it. "August is working for me, helping get the homestead back on its feet after everything." Mrs. Peterson nodded sympathetically. "Of course, dear. A woman alone needs help with the heavy work, but if it should become something more, well, no one would think the worse of you for it. Life's too short and too hard out here to deny comfort when it's offered honorably." Hannah didn't know how to respond to that, so she merely smiled and turned the conversation to Mrs. Peterson's grandchildren, who had recently arrived from St. Louis for an extended visit. Throughout the day, Hannah found herself drawn back into the rhythms of community life that she had abandoned after Samuel's death. She helped prepare the midday meal, exchanged recipes and household tips with the other women, and even held Mrs. Taylor's new baby an experience that brought tears to her eyes, but also a healing sense of connection to life's continuity. From time to time, she glanced toward the barn raising, where August was visible among the men, his height and broad shoulders making him easy to spot. He worked steadily, offering suggestions that were clearly valued by the other men. Once he looked up and caught her watching him, and the smile they exchanged across the busy yard felt like a private moment despite the crowd between them. By late afternoon, the barn's frame was up, the most crucial and labor-intensive part of the work complete. The remaining tasks would be finished by the McAllisters and a few neighbors over the coming weeks. As the gathering began to disperse, families loading wagons for the journey home, Hannah found herself surrounded by a group of women pressing food upon her to take home. "You're too thin, dear, Mrs. McAllister insisted, adding a jar of preserved peaches to the basket already filled with bread, cheese, and smoked ham. "Need to keep your strength up." "And this is for that cough August mentioned," Mrs. Taylor added, handing Hannah a small bottle of dark liquid. "Honey, whiskey, and horehound. Best remedy there is." Hannah was touched by their generosity and slightly embarrassed that August had apparently been discussing her health with the neighbors. She had developed a persistent cough in the late winter. Nothing serious, but annoying enough that August had noticed and evidently worried about it. When August finally joined her, his shirt damp with honest sweat and his face showing the satisfaction of hard work well done, Hannah was ready to head home. The day had been pleasant, but emotionally taxing, her first real social interaction since Samuel's death, and a reminder of all she had withdrawn from in her grief. The drive home was quieter than the morning journey, both of them tired from the day's activities. As the wagon rolled along the rutted track toward their homestead, Hannah found herself thinking of it as home in a way she hadn't since before Samuel died. The realization startled her when had the cabin stopped being merely the place where she existed and started being home again. "You're quiet," August observed as the homestead came into view, the evening sun casting long shadows across the greening pastures. "Was it too much, being around all those people?" Hannah shook her head. "No, it was good, different but good. Everyone was very kind." She hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Taylor gave me something for my cough." August had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Mentioned it when she asked after you. That cough's been lingering longer than it should." "You've been worried about me," Hannah said, not a question but a realization. August glanced at her, then back at the road. "Of course I have. You've been through more than anyone should have to bear, and you work too hard, don't rest enough." "Pot calling the kettle black," Hannah replied with a small smile. "I don't think I've seen you take a single day of rest since you arrived." "Different," August argued. "I'm used to hard work, been doing it all my life. You were a town girl before you married, used to easier living." Hannah laughed outright at that, the sound surprising both of them. "Easier." "August Calloway, I was the oldest of 6 children, raised on a small farm outside Pittsburgh. I was milking cows and chopping firewood before I was 10 years old." August looked genuinely surprised. "You never mentioned that." "You never asked," Hannah replied, still smiling. "You assumed I was some delicate flower transplanted to the frontier, when in fact I chose this life precisely because it reminded me of my childhood, the open spaces, the connection to the land and animals." August shook his head, chuckling. "Well, I stand corrected." "Still, you've been through a lot. It's natural I'd be concerned." The simple statement, delivered without any particular emphasis, warmed Hannah more than she would have expected. They completed the journey in comfortable silence, the shared day having somehow shifted their relationship yet again, bringing them a step closer to whatever they were becoming to each other. As April gave way to May, the homestead flourished under their combined efforts. The calving season continued successfully, with 16 healthy calves born by mid-month. The garden sprouted row upon row of vegetables. Hannah's chicken flock expanded with a new batch of chicks, and the repairs August had undertaken throughout the winter proved their worth as spring storms rolled across the plains without causing damage to the buildings. Their routine adjusted to the season: early mornings checking the herd, days filled with planting and repairs, evenings on the porch watching the sunset if weather permitted, or by the fire if rain drove them inside. They spoke more freely now, sharing stories from their pasts, discussing plans for the homestead's future, occasionally touching on deeper subjects like faith, loss, and what constituted a life well lived. Yet despite this growing closeness, neither broached the subject of what would happen beyond their current arrangement. August had agreed to stay until things were in order, a conveniently vague time frame that allowed them both to avoid defining their relationship more precisely. Hannah found herself both grateful for this ambiguity and increasingly frustrated by it. The truth, which she admitted only to herself in the privacy of her bedroom at night, was that she had developed feelings for August that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. She admired his integrity, his quiet competence, his genuine kindness. She enjoyed his company, valued his opinions, and yes, found herself physically drawn to him in a way that sometimes made it difficult to maintain the careful boundaries they had established. Whether August felt similarly, Hannah couldn't be certain. There were moments when she caught him looking at her with an expression that made her heart race, brief touches that lingered a second longer than necessary, conversations that seemed on the verge of veering into more personal territory before one of them carefully steered them back to safer ground. But August was unfailingly respectful, never presuming or pushing, and Hannah wasn't sure if this restraint stemmed from uncertainty about her feelings or a lack of interest in anything beyond their current partnership. The situation came to a head in late May, on a perfect spring evening when they sat on the porch after supper, watching fireflies begin to emerge in the gathering dusk. Hannah had been unusually quiet all day, her thoughts preoccupied with a significant date. The following day would have been Samuel's 6th birthday. "Penny for your thoughts," August said gently, breaking a long silence. Hannah sighed, deciding honesty was the only path forward. Tomorrow would have been Samuel's birthday. He would have been 6, August nodded, understanding immediately. A hard day to face. Yes. Hannah twisted her hands in her lap. "I've been thinking about what we would have done to celebrate. Last year I made him a special cake with strawberry preserves. Daniel carved him a little wooden horse." Her voice caught. "Samuel was so proud of that horse, carried it everywhere for weeks. What would he have wanted this year?" August asked, his tone encouraging her to talk about her son rather than avoid the painful subject. Hannah smiled sadly. He'd been talking about a fishing pole of his own, said he was old enough to catch his own fish, not just watch his papa do it. She shook her head. He wasn't, of course. Still too little to handle it properly, but that confidence, that certainty that he could do anything. I loved that about him. August was quiet for a moment, then said, "What if we went fishing tomorrow, in his honor, catch something for supper, maybe have a little picnic by the creek?" The suggestion touched Hannah deeply. It wasn't about avoiding the pain of the day, but about honoring Samuel's memory in a way that celebrated who he had been. "I think he would have liked that," she said softly. "Yes, let's do that." August nodded, satisfied. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell completely, the stars emerging in the vast Wyoming sky. When Hannah finally rose to go inside, August remained seated, seemingly lost in thought. "Coming in?" she asked, pausing at the door. He shook his head. "Think I'll sit a while longer." "Beautiful night." Hannah nodded and went inside, wondering at the slight shift she'd sensed in his mood. She prepared for bed with her usual routine, but sleep eluded her as she thought about the day ahead, and all it represented, not just Samuel's birthday, but a milestone in her grief journey. A day she had dreaded for months now transformed into something that might hold both sorrow and sweetness through August's thoughtful suggestion. The next morning, Hannah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, unusual since she was typically the first to rise. She dressed quickly and found August in the kitchen, already preparing breakfast, not just the usual fare but also hot cakes, a special treat they rarely indulged in due to the precious sugar they required. "Good morning," he greeted her with a warm smile. "Thought you might like to sleep in a bit today." Hannah was touched by his consideration. "Thank you. This looks wonderful." They ate breakfast together, August keeping the conversation light, focused on the day ahead rather than the significance of the date. After the meal, he disappeared into the lean-to and returned with something hidden behind his back. "I made something," he said, somewhat self-consciously. "For today. For Samuel, really?" He brought his hands forward, revealing a small fishing pole, perfectly sized for a child of 5 or 6. The craftsmanship was exquisite, a straight, polished branch for the pole, twine for the line, a proper hook, and even a small wooden float painted red and white. Hannah's breath caught. "August." Thought we could leave it at his grave after we're done fishing, August explained. So he'd have it with him. Tears filled Hannah's eyes, but they weren't the devastating tears of pure grief she had become so familiar with. These were complex tears, holding both sorrow and a profound gratitude for August's understanding of what this day meant to her. "It's perfect," she managed to say. "Absolutely perfect." They spent the morning by the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the property, a spot Samuel had loved for its small sandy beach and the willow trees that provided shade. August taught Hannah to fish properly, something Daniel had never had the patience for, and she caught 2 fat trout that they cooked over a small fire for their midday meal. They spoke of Samuel often, Hannah sharing memories of his adventures by this very creek. Finding that the stories brought more comfort than pain on this day, in the afternoon, they visited Samuel's grave, Hannah bringing wildflowers while August carried the small fishing pole. The oak cross he had made stood firm, weathering its first spring beautifully. Hannah arranged the flowers while August carefully propped the fishing pole against the cross. "Happy birthday, Samuel," Hannah said, her voice steady. "Mama loves you always." August stood beside her, hat in hand, respectful of the moment but also a solid presence that anchored her to the present even as her heart reached toward the past. When Hannah finally stepped back from the grave, August hesitantly put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture of comfort she gratefully leaned into. "Thank you," she said simply as they walked back toward the cabin. "For today, for understanding what I needed." August squeezed her shoulder gently before releasing her. "You're stronger than you know, Hannah. The way you faced this day honored his memory while still living your own life that takes remarkable courage." His words settled around her heart like a warm blanket. They continued toward the cabin in companionable silence, the spring evening perfect around them, birds singing, new leaves rustling in a gentle breeze, the smell of earth and growing things filling the air. As they reached the porch, Hannah paused, suddenly needing to express something she had been holding back for too long. "August," she began, turning to face him, "I want you to know how much your presence here has meant to me, not just the practical help, though God knows I needed that, but your companionship, your understanding." She took a deep breath. "I don't think I would have survived this winter without you." August's expression softened, his eyes holding her steadily. "You would have," he said with quiet certainty. "You're the strongest person I know, Hannah Blackwell. But I'm glad I was here, more glad than I can say." Something in his tone made Hannah's heart beat faster. They stood facing each other on the porch, the moment stretching between them with new possibility. August took a half step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Hannah," he said, his voice low and serious. "I need to tell you something I've been thinking about for a while now." She nodded, unable to find her voice as hope and fear tangled in her chest. "I care for you," August continued carefully, "more than as a friend or business partner. I've tried to keep my feelings to myself because I know you've been through so much, and the last thing you need is a man complicating your life further." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "But today, seeing how you honored Samuel, how you found a way to carry your grief while still embracing life, it made me realize I might be doing you a disservice by not being honest about my feelings." Hannah felt lightheaded, her pulse pounding in her ears as August's words sank in. He cared for her as she cared for him. "I don't expect anything," August hastened to add when she remained silent. "And if you'd prefer I leave, find someone else to help with the homestead, I'll understand completely." "I just couldn't go on pretending, August," Hannah interrupted, finding her voice at last. "I don't want you to leave." He went still, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "No," Hannah shook her head, taking her own step forward so that barely a foot separated them. "No, I care for you too, have for some time now." The admission felt both terrifying and liberating, but I've been afraid of what it might mean to open my heart again after losing so much, afraid that perhaps I was just clinging to you out of gratitude or loneliness. And now August asked quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Now I know it's more than that," Hannah said with growing certainty. "What I feel for you isn't about needing anyone. It's about you, your kindness, your strength, your understanding." She smiled tremulously. "The way you brought flowers to a stranger's grave, the way you knew exactly what Samuel would have wanted for his birthday." August raised his hand slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished, and gently touched her cheek. "I've tried so hard not to rush you, not to presume." "I know," Hannah whispered, leaning slightly into his touch, "and I'm grateful for that, but I'm ready now, August, ready to see where this might lead." His thumb brushed lightly across her cheekbone. "May I kiss you, Hannah?" In answer, she closed the remaining distance between them, lifting her face to his. August's lips met hers gently, a kiss that held both reverence and promise. Hannah's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms as the kiss deepened, becoming something more than tentative exploration, but still restrained, respectful of all they still had to learn about each other. When they finally parted, August rested his forehead against hers, his hands warm at her waist. "Been wanting to do that for months," he admitted with a soft laugh. Hannah smiled, feeling a lightness in her chest that had been absent for so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. "Why didn't you?" "Wasn't sure you were ready," August replied simply. "Or if you felt the same way, didn't want to risk what we already had." Hannah nodded, understanding completely. "I felt the same, but Today helped me realize that honoring Samuel's memory doesn't mean closing myself off from new happiness." August drew back slightly to look at her properly, his expression serious again. "I want you to know, Hannah, I'd never try to replace what you had with Daniel or expect you to forget Samuel. They'll always be part of you, part of who you are." "I know," Hannah said, deeply touched by his understanding. "And Catherine and your baby will always be part of you. We both carry our pasts with us. But maybe." She took a deep breath, voicing the hope that had been growing in her heart. "Maybe we can build a future together, one that honors those we've lost while creating something new." August smiled, a full, unguarded smile that transformed his weathered face. "I'd like that very much, Hannah Blackwell." As darkness fell around them, they remained on the porch, talking more openly than they ever had before about their feelings, their fears, their hopes for what might lie ahead. When Hannah finally rose to go inside, August caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm before releasing her. "Sleep well," he said softly. "We have all the time in the world now." The weeks that followed brought a gradual evolution in their relationship. They moved slowly, both aware of the importance of building a solid foundation beyond the partnership they had already established. August continued to sleep in the lean-to, though he now joined Hannah on the porch swing in the evenings, sometimes holding her hand, sometimes with his arm around her shoulders as they watched the stars emerge. They spoke more openly about the future now, not just the immediate needs of the homestead, but longer-term plans. August had savings from years of work, enough to invest in expanding the herd further and making substantial improvements to the property. Hannah shared her dreams of adding an orchard, perhaps beehives for honey, making the homestead not just self-sufficient but truly prosperous. In mid-June, August made another trip to town, returning with materials to enlarge the cabin: lumber, glass for an additional window, proper flooring to replace the packed earth in the main room. When Hannah questioned the expense, August merely smiled and said, "A good home should grow with the family that lives in it." The implication wasn't lost on Hannah, though neither of them had yet spoken directly of marriage. That conversation came a week later, on a warm evening as they sat on the newly expanded porch August had built, watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Hannah," August began, his voice carrying a note of seriousness that immediately caught her attention. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." She turned to look at him, her heart suddenly racing. "Yes," August took her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against hers. These past months with you have been the happiest I've known in years. I came here a drifter, a man with no real place in the world. You've given me purpose, a home, a reason to plant roots again." He paused, his eyes holding her steadily. "I love you, Hannah, not just for who you are now, but for all you've been through, all you've overcome. I love your strength, your kindness, your capacity to keep loving even after such terrible loss." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes at his words, but she didn't interrupt, sensing he had more to say. "I know it hasn't been very long," August continued, "and I'd understand if you wanted to wait. But I'm certain of my feelings, certain that what we've found together is rare and precious." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold band, unadorned but beautifully crafted. "Hannah Blackwell, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Hannah looked at the ring, then at August's face, open, vulnerable, hopeful. In that moment, her remaining doubts fell away. This wasn't a betrayal of Daniel or Samuel, wasn't her settling for comfort or security. This was a second chance at love, unexpected but no less real for being unplanned. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Yes, August, I will marry you." His face lit with such joy that Hannah felt her heart might burst with answering happiness. August slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, and then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a depth of feeling that left her breathless. "I promise you this," he said when they finally parted, his forehead resting against hers. "I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust, trying to bring you as much happiness as you've brought me." "You already have," Hannah whispered, her hand coming up to touch his face, the face that had become so dear to her. "By seeing me when I was invisible with grief, by bringing flowers to a stranger's grave, by offering hope when I thought I had none left." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in town, witnessed by the McAllisters and other neighbors who had become friends. Hannah wore a new dress of dove-gray silk that August had insisted on buying for the occasion, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. August, in a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable, couldn't take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony. Afterward, there was a small celebration at the McAllister Ranch, food and music, and well wishes from the community that had supported Hannah through her darkest days. When it was time to leave, August helped Hannah into their wagon, now decorated with ribbons and flowers by the mischievous younger members of the congregation. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked, his smile teasing but his eyes serious. Hannah nodded, the new name settling around her like a comfortable shawl, not erasing who she had been as Hannah Blackwell, but adding a new layer to her identity, a new chapter to her story. "Yes, Mr. Calloway, I believe I am." The homestead welcomed them back in the golden light of late afternoon, looking more prosperous than it had in years thanks to their combined efforts. The cattle grazed peacefully in the north pasture, chickens scratched in the yard, the garden burst with summer abundance. And on the hill overlooking it all, Samuel's grave stood as a reminder of what Hannah had lost, but also of what she had survived. As August lifted her down from the wagon, Hannah glanced toward that hill, sending a silent message to her son. "I'll always love you, I'll always remember." "But I'm living again now, the way you would have wanted." August followed her gaze, understanding without words. "Should we visit him? Before we go inside?" Hannah nodded, touched by his intuitive understanding of what she needed. They walked hand in hand up the gentle slope to Samuel's grave, where August had recently planted perennial flowers that would bloom year after year without tending. The fishing pole still leaned against the oak cross, weathered now but still a poignant reminder of a birthday celebrated in absence. "I've brought someone to meet you properly, Sammy," Hannah said softly, squeezing August's hand. "This is August, he's family now, our family." August removed his hat, standing respectfully beside Hannah. "I'll look after her, Samuel," he said simply. "You have my word on that." They stood together for a few minutes more, the summer breeze rustling the grass around the grave, wildflowers nodding in the late afternoon sunlight. Then, by silent mutual agreement, they turned and walked back down the hill toward the cabin, toward their home, their future. That night, as they lay together in the expanded bedroom August had built off the main cabin, Hannah rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. His hand moved gently through her hair, soothing and tender. "Happy?" he asked softly. Hannah considered the question, all its complexities and nuances. Happiness wasn't a simple thing, not after all she had endured. It wasn't the uncomplicated joy she had known before loss taught her how fragile life could be. But it was real nonetheless, deeper perhaps, more precious for being unexpected, for being fought for. "Yes," she said finally, raising herself on one elbow to look down at her husband's face in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Not the same happiness I knew before." "But yes, August, I'm happy," he smiled, drawing her back down against him. "That's all I want, to see you smile, to hear you laugh, to build a life with you that honors the past while embracing what's to come." Hannah pressed a kiss to his chest, right above his heart. "We already have." One day at a time, one moment at a time. August's arms tightened around her, "and we'll keep doing it, together." As Hannah drifted towards sleep in her husband's embrace, she found herself thinking of all the unexpected turns her life had taken: the journey west with Daniel, the joy of Samuel's birth, the devastating losses that had nearly broken her, and now this new beginning with August. None of it had been planned, none of it anticipated. Life had simply unfolded, bringing both unbearable pain and unexpected joy, and somehow, through it all, she had survived. More than survived, she had found her way back to living fully, to loving again, to building a future she could embrace with her whole heart. 1 year later, on a perfect summer day, Hannah stood once more on the hill beside Samuel's grave. But this time, she wasn't alone in her grief. August stood beside her, strong and steady as always, and in her arms was a tiny bundle, their daughter, Elizabeth Samuel Calloway, named for August's sister and Hannah's son. "This is your sister, Sammy," Hannah said softly to the grave as the baby slept peacefully in her arms. "She'll know all about you as she grows, all your adventures, all the joy you brought us." August's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her gently against his side. "He would have been a wonderful big brother," he said. "Yes," Hannah agreed, blinking back tears that were bittersweet rather than purely painful. "He would have." They stood together as a family, those present, and those remembered, as the Wyoming wind blew gently across the prairie, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the promise of all the days yet to come.